Welcome to the Steel Curtain Podcast. It's Monday, September 9th, and the Pittsburgh Steelers are 1-0 after beating the Atlanta Falcons 18-10 in Week 1 at Mercedes-Benz Stadium down in Atlanta. I'm Josh Yourish, and today I'm going to react to Pittsburgh's new offensive coordinator, Arthur Smith, break down Justin Fields' Steelers debut. We thought it was going to be Russell Wilson's debut, but it wasn't. Talk about the same old Mike Tomlin in year 18 being the same old Mike Tomlin. But first, I'll tell you the real reason why the Steelers won on Sunday. Sure, the Steelers' defense looked elite, and we'll lead with that. TJ Watt was the best player on the field by far, and maybe the best player in the NFL in Week 1. He had a sack, 2 tackles for a loss, 3 pressures, a fumble recovery, and 2 strip sacks wiped away by penalties. One that was a penalty on Dante Jackson for illegal hands to the face. One that absolutely was not a penalty, what he was called offsides for when he just jumped the snap count absolutely perfectly. After the game, he told reporters that he had found a golden nugget throughout the week that was going to help him jump Kirk Cousins' snap count, and he did it, used it in the perfect spot. And then the very next play, Atlanta scores a touchdown that shouldn't have been a touchdown because TJ Watt was that dominant and would have taken the ball away. He recovered it on that play, but it was wiped away. He's now at 97.5 career sacks because he did get one at the end of the game, and it was well-deserved. He took a bow at the end, which I think was an excellent celebration. He now should be probably the second fastest player in NFL history to reach 100 sacks, faster than his brother, faster than a bunch of superstar pass rushers in NFL history, and truly one of the greats, still doing it at an incredibly high level heading into his age 30 season. That's a great sign for the Pittsburgh Steelers. Cam Hayward, he looked back to his old self. He dealt with the core injury last year. That was a big problem. He controlled the line of scrimmage. He had 2 pressures, 4 stops in the run game, and was just excellent. Exactly what you expect from Cam Hayward. I didn't talk about it last week because it happened after my show, but Hayward getting the 3-year contract extension, essentially making him a Steeler for life, and I'm all right with it. It looks like the price is reasonable. It looks like there are outs in the deal for the Steelers if they need it, and the way Cam Hayward played in Week 1, they may not need to use any of those outs because he looked really good. Joey Porter Jr. now becoming a stalwart of that defense, like along with Watt, Hayward, Minka. JPJ is maybe now in that group. He allowed 1 catch for 7 yards to Drake London, who has been underwhelming after being a top 10 wide receiver drafted, or top 10 pick at wide receiver for the Falcons a few years ago, but is still a productive receiver who's dealt with bad quarterback play. And Joey Porter Jr. completely shut him down. Most importantly, I mentioned Minka as a part of that, I guess 4, maybe 5-headed monster now with Patrick Queen. I was underwhelmed by what I saw from Queen, but I'm not going to lie to you like I exactly know all of the assignments on the defense and where Queen needed to be. There just weren't any splash plays from Queen. You'd want to see that a little bit more. He didn't seem all that impactful, but the way he was most impactful is that he was sheerly competent, right? Queen and Landon Roberts and Peyton Wilson, who looked pretty good in his debut because we didn't get to see many of the Steelers rookies. Roman Wilson, Troy Fautanu out with injuries. We saw Zach Frazier in at center. He looked strong. Peyton Wilson looked pretty good too, especially on some quick passes, some quick screens to Bijan Robinson. Wilson able to diagnose them very quickly, nearly saved a first down when Atlanta was driving later in the game. They allowed Minka, that group, allowed Minka to play 54 of his 56 snaps at free safety, his position. The past 2 seasons, because there's been no one at middle linebacker, Minka just hasn't played his position. The defense runs so much better with Fitzpatrick back at free safety. That's where he is now. You saw the secondary look very strong, right? They won the game with 2 interceptions. Deshaun Elliott and Dante Jackson, 2 newcomers, both getting interceptions. The Steelers won the turnover battle 3-0. And that's all great. The defense looks like the type of defense that could have you competitive in the AFC North. Right now, the Steelers are in first place in the AFC North because the Ravens lost to the Chiefs on Thursday night. The Browns got killed by the Cowboys, and Deshaun Watson looked horrible on Tom Brady's broadcasting debut at 425 yesterday. And the Bengals got embarrassed by the New England Patriots and Jacoby Brissett, who don't expect to win very many games at all this season. So the Steelers are 1-0. The Steelers are in first place. But it was a lot easier for the Steelers defense to look that good, because the real reason that the Steelers won 18-10 over the Falcons in week 1, Kirk Cousins came back too soon. He did not look like himself as a quarterback. And Kirk Cousins looking like himself is not an elite NFL quarterback, at least not in my opinion. But he's a lot better than he played yesterday. And he's a lot more versatile in terms of the offense you can run. Zach Robinson, the Falcons' new offensive coordinator, he came over from LA with Raheem Morris, the new head coach. They want to run a lot of under center stuff. They rely on the run game to set up some play action. It's stuff that Kirk Cousins is very familiar with from first his time with Kyle Shanahan in Washington early in his career, and then in Minnesota with Kevin O'Connell, another McVay Shanahan disciple. And Cousins didn't play like that guy, and Atlanta didn't run that offense. 96% of Kirk Cousins' snaps came out of either the shotgun or the pistol. And this is how predictable the Atlanta offense was, because Kirk Cousins coming off of an Achilles tear, and they talked about it on the broadcast, no quarterback since Trent Dilfer has played any games the season after they tore their Achilles. Kirk Cousins was the first. Tomorrow, Aaron Rodgers will be the second. And Cousins' injury happened in week 9. Rodgers happened in week 1. So at least he has a better chance and a longer runway of recovery. Cousins was not ready to play. So let's talk about how predictable the Atlanta offense was for the Steelers defense. 96% of the snaps out of shotgun or pistol, 22 snaps out of shotgun, and 0 designed runs for Atlanta. 81% of their snaps out of pistol were run. So it was pretty much, if Cousins was in pistol, going to be a handoff to Bijan Robinson or Tyler Algier, almost exclusively Bijan Robinson. If Cousins is in shotgun, it's a pass. That simplifies things so much for a defense. The Steelers, to their credit, took advantage of that, but it's a huge weakness for Kirk Cousins, and it's the reason that the Steelers were able to win kicking 6 field goals and not scoring a single touchdown. Cousins last year was number 1 in the league in under center snaps, running Kevin O'Connell's offense in Minnesota. And at the time he was injured, he was leading the league in passing yards per game. Now, granted, that's with Justin Jefferson and Jordan Addison up in Minnesota, but there are some targets. There are some receivers in Atlanta, and that is not the Kirk Cousins we saw at all. He was 28th in the NFL in week 1 in expected completion percentage at 61.8%, only ahead of Bryce Young, Will Levis, Anthony Richardson. That's a unique situation because he's a high variance player. Jalen Hurts, who's also a very high variance player and didn't play particularly well in week 1. So being just ahead of Bryce Young and Will Levis, and then 2 high variance dual threat quarterbacks, that's not Kirk Cousins' game. That's not a typical Kirk Cousins performance. Atlanta would have been much better off, in my opinion, if they had just played Michael Penix Jr., their, top 10 overall pick quarterback that they took. They took him for a reason. You might as well try to play him. And Atlanta decided not to. They paid the price for it. 5 of Cousins' 16 completions came at or behind the line of scrimmage. They were just getting the ball off his hands as quickly as possible. He didn't attempt a single pass over 20 yards downfield. His performance was terrible. It should have been even worse because of the 2 strip sacks that Watt had called back. One for good reason, one not for good reason, of course. And the fumble that Watt did recover, that was Cousins' fault too, because he was rusty and Greg Olsen had an excellent breakdown of it. He lifted his leg to signal the snap because Atlanta had to use a silent count at times at home because there were so many Steelers fans there, which is amazing. And then he signaled the receiver or the tight end, I believe, to come across in motion and realized it was an absolute train wreck. And Olsen did a better job than I just did breaking it down. But that's not a mistake a veteran quarterback like Kirk Cousins makes ever, unless he's coming off an Achilles injury way too early and doesn't feel comfortable out on a football field, which was the case on Sunday. It's reminiscent of week 1 in 2022, and you might call it like a classic Mike Tomlin win. The Steelers don't even need a touchdown. That's just Mike Tomlin. Good Mike Tomlin football. They don't turn it over. They win the turnover battle. Okay. Yeah, maybe. But it's also just a quarterback who's not ready to play. It's the same thing as 2021 in week 1 when the Steelers beat the Bengals in overtime with Mitch Trubisky at quarterback playing horribly because Joe Burrow was coming off an appendectomy in the preseason. He didn't play any preseason snaps, and Burrow threw 4 picks. Week 1 in the NFL is very different from week 1 in the NFL years ago because a lot of players do not play in the preseason. The preseason is truncated, and even the games that exist, most teams don't really use them because they don't want to get their players hurt, especially a veteran quarterback coming off of an Achilles tear. The Atlanta offense, it may not be great. I don't know what it'll be, but it's not going to be as bad as it was Sunday at the end of the year. The Steelers got lucky to face Kirk Cousins in week 1. And the Steelers will get lucky again in week 2 to face Bo Nix and the Denver Broncos. And Bo Nix had a horrible debut. And I can't imagine better things are coming for Bo Nix because he's not a player that I liked very much at Oregon and not a player that I thought was going to be a very good player in the NFL. So the Steelers could get off to a 2-0 start here, but it has a lot more to do with the quarterbacks they're playing than their team and then their head coach. Because it's a new year. It's year 18 of Mike Tomlin. And it's the same Mike Tomlin. And one of the biggest decisions of the game was a 4th and 1, up 5 at the Atlanta 6 with 7:09 left in the game. And Tomlin decided to go for it on a quarterback sneak. And Fields got stopped. And it looked like it was disarray on the field. They tried to rush into it. Fields took the snap very quickly. An Atlanta defender came over the top of the pile and dropped Fields for a loss. And they turned it over when they could have gone up a touchdown. Right? Still, it's a 1-score game either way, 5-8. But you feel a lot better if they can only tie you. And they need a 2-point conversion to tie you when they haven't been able to move the ball well at all game. I'm not one to lean on the conservative side of things when it comes to 4th down decisions. And it's so easy to second guess when it doesn't work out. But I'm not so much second guessing that decision. I'm criticizing Tomlin's explanation because it doesn't square with how he operated and his team operated the entire rest of the game. So Tomlin was asked about going for the 4th and 1. The reporters, obviously that's a question you're going to ask. And Tomlin went to a Tomlinism. We're not going to live in our fears. Well, you lived in your fears all day. All day. All day the Steelers played for field goals. All day the Steelers played it conservative. They lived in their fears. Mike Tomlin's fears are turning the ball over. Mike Tomlin's fears are being aggressive on offense. Mike Tomlin's fears are trusting a quarterback that isn't Ben Roethlisberger. Now, he hasn't had the most talented quarterbacks to trust since Ben Roethlisberger. But those are Mike Tomlin's fears. And he lived in them all day. And then in that moment, when you can go up 8 with 7 minutes left and Atlanta needs a touchdown and a 2-point conversion to tie you. Now you're not living in your fears. Now you're going to run a quarterback sneak when you had done it multiple times early in the game, and it looked like a mess on that particular play as Fields got everyone to the line of scrimmage. Now you're not living in your fears. Okay. The first drive of the game. Shaky start, right? Fields fumbles the first snap. Possibly a disaster. He jumps on it. Okay. Disaster, crisis averted. And eventually Fields misses his first throw on second down to Van Jefferson, I believe. And then he bails you out with his legs, which is a reason that I've been saying all offseason Justin Fields has to play, because he can bail you out with his legs. And Russell Wilson probably doesn't have that in his bag anymore. So you get across the 50, get to the Atlanta side of things. Fields misses Najee Harris on second and 10, or on first and 10, on second and 10, completes a 4-yarder to Freiermuth, sets up 3rd and 6. And you hand off to your third best running back, Cordero Patterson, to get 2 yards. A play call that in the moment, Olsen on the broadcast pointed out, this is a play call you make when you're looking to go for 2. You're looking to have 2 plays to get the 6 yards. You're looking to go for it on 4th down. And you settle for a 57-yard field goal. Chris Boswell nails it because Chris Boswell is one of, if not the best kicker in the NFL. And it's nice to have that on the sideline. But to me, that's living in your fears. Not trusting your quarterback to try to make a throw on 3rd and 6, instead handing it off to your third best running back to just gain a couple yards and make a 60-yard field goal, a 57-yard field goal for Chris Boswell. I'm pretty sure the percentages aren't that different on a 60 to a 57-yard field goal. You know where the percentages are different? Throwing the ball on 3rd and 6 compared to handing it off up the middle to Cordero freaking Patterson. That's living in your fears. The second drive of the game, the drive gets killed on the George Pickens end around, and you have to settle for a field goal. That's fine. Okay. But you get to 2nd and 20, and you hand the ball off twice. That's living in your fears. You're not trusting your quarterback. And maybe Justin Fields hasn't earned your trust yet. But to say post-game, we're not going to live in our fears, you did all day, and you were happy settling with field goals. If that is your mindset, then take the points. If take the points is your mindset, you got to keep taking the points. Before the half. And this is classic Mike Tomlin. Classic Mike Tomlin. You get the ball back with 32 seconds left at your own 30. And okay, you can run it, run the clock out, go into half, down 10-6. No, we're going to throw. Okay, I love that aggressiveness. That's great, but it's not real aggressiveness if you throw a 7-yard pass to Calvin Austin with 2 timeouts left, and instead of calling one of those timeouts, you let the clock run down to 14 seconds before you get your next playoff, which is a 5-yard pass to Pat Freiermuth. It worked out because with 9 seconds left on your own 42, Justin Fields makes a great throw on a well-designed play by Arthur Smith to George Pickens to put you in field goal range, and you get 3 points. Great play by your quarterback. But if you're being aggressive, if you're throwing the ball, if you, as you say, Mike Tomlin, are not living in your fears, then call your timeout. Maybe it's just poor clock management. We have 18 years of proof that Mike Tomlin cannot manage the clock. Maybe that's the case. I don't think so. I think Mike Tomlin wanted to show aggressiveness, fake aggressiveness, and let the clock run out anyways. Arthur Smith takes the deep shot, and it works out. That's great. But George Pickens, if he didn't step out of bounds accidentally, nearly ran the clock out because you didn't have enough time left. And if you don't hit on that, you don't get those 3 points, which you didn't ultimately need, but were very helpful in terms of how you manage the game the rest of the way. That's living in your fears. Not calling that timeout after the Austin completion, in my opinion, is living in your fears. And then you get to the fourth quarter, 7 minutes left, 4th and 1, and you go for it. That's not living in your fears. But the rest of the game, you lived in your fears. And after the game, you said, we're not going to live in our fears. It's the same old Mike Tomlin stuff. And the Steelers are 1-0. The Steelers are first place in the AFC North. But let's not overreact to this. Let's not act like everything is fixed and we're saved from the Matt Canada era. Because the Matt Canada era was a lot on Matt Canada. It's also a lot on Mike Tomlin. Because I don't know what quarterback, Kenny Pickett, Justin Fields, a better quarterback than those two, is going to create a dynamic offense in Pittsburgh while they're handcuffed by their head coach who doesn't want to be aggressive. Last year, this fan base was so fed up, it bordered on like legitimate apathy. People stopped caring about what happened to the Steelers at the end of the season until Mason Rudolph came in and miraculously dragged them into the playoffs, only to get slaughtered up in Buffalo. A game that may have been a bit closer, but they were never going to win that game. That doesn't happen. That's not how you win playoff games in the NFL. And the Steelers are trying to win regular season games and win that same way again. So, okay. Last season's a borderline disaster, at least on offense. So you fire the offensive coordinator. You bring in Arthur Smith. They bring in Russell Wilson. Move on from Pickett. You add Fields because Pickett's unhappy that Wilson's here. And it looks exactly the same in week 1. And somehow the fan base and some of the writers and the media are buying all the way back in. Nothing changed. It's the same thing. And it will continue to be the same thing. And when the Steelers play a good team, it won't work anymore. And in the second half of the schedule, the Steelers So maybe you expected me to hop on here and be very positive about the Steelers getting to 1-0. But I just don't feel that way. That's not how this team makes me feel at this moment with an 18-10 win and no offensive touchdowns. And it's the same old Mike Tomlin, and it'll continue to be the same old Mike Tomlin all year long. So why are we being fooled? I'm not going to be. I predicted 9-8 coming into the year. Nothing I saw, as elite as this defense could be, it could be the best defense in the NFL. Nothing I saw in week 1 says anything different about the outlook of the Steelers. This is a mediocre team with a bad offense and an overly conservative head coach, terrified to take any chances on the offensive side of the ball because he doesn't want to turn the ball over and he believes that's the only way to win in the NFL. And they took advantage of a quarterback, 9 months removed from an Achilles tear, who should have never been on the field. 1-0, first place in the AFC North, but I do not feel good about things for the Pittsburgh Steelers right now.
And if you're a Pittsburgh Steelers fan, before we get to the next segment, if you're a Pittsburgh Steelers fan and you would like to support the podcast, please make sure to like and subscribe on YouTube. We really appreciate the support here.
Curtain Podcast. And that brings us to our weekly award. I'll have a weekly award handout each week. Like my game ball, only much more fun and ridiculous. And this week, it's the Eaton Park Smiley Cookie Award for the thing that only Pittsburghers and Yinzers think is good. And it goes to Arthur Smith. Because only the Pittsburgh Steelers fan base that has been tortured by Matt Canada could be encouraged by what the Steelers offense looked like on Sunday. And a lot of them are. Even Mark Caboli, formerly of The Athletic, now the Steelers correspondent for the Pat McAfee show, wrote about how different the offense is and the genius mind of Arthur Smith. There were a lot of ugly things about the Steelers offense. This is not problem solved. And I like a smiley cookie. Sure, I'll eat one every once in a while. Somebody brings some smiley cookies to a party. If you're a Pittsburgher, you know what I'm talking about. Somebody brought them in school in 4th grade for their birthday. Yeah, great. It's not a good cookie. It's dry. It's like overly sweet, always a little bit stale. It's not a great cookie. Pittsburghers love it. Arthur Smith did not call a great game on Sunday. And a lot of Pittsburghers are falling for it. A lot of Pittsburghers are loving it. I can't understand why. I can understand it a little bit with a smiley cookie because I had it when I was 6. But with Arthur Smith, why is he getting the benefit of the doubt like this? Let's go into it a little bit because I have a lot on this, and I'm the offense was more functional than it was, but in my opinion, than it was last year. But in my opinion, that's a lot credit to Justin Fields and his ability to run. Otherwise, I don't know what this game would have looked like. I came into the year and all offseason, I was worried about the Arthur Smith, Justin Fields, or the Arthur Smith, Russell Wilson combination because it is a square peg, round hole. It does not fit. Arthur Smith loves to throw over the middle of the field. He wants a quarterback who's going to stand in there, hard play action, blind throws, borderline blind throws over the middle of the field. That's what Ryan Tannehill was excellent at in Tennessee when Arthur Smith ran his best offenses. And that's not what we saw. That's not what Fields or Wilson do well. And it's also not what we saw on Sunday in week 1. Smith managed to play to neither his strengths nor Justin Fields' strengths. It's all his offense has always been about throws over the middle to create yards after the catch off of play action on outside zone runs. It is a Shanahan thing. It's a McVay thing. It's had different iterations throughout the years. It's looked different with Derrick Henry to Bijan Robinson to Tyler Algier to Desmond Ridder to Ryan Tannehill, right? Let's look better. Let's look worse. Those are the principles. And Smith relied heavily on runs with Najee Harris. Okay. Harris was fine. And he didn't throw over the middle of the field at all. He didn't create any explosive plays with yards after the catch at all. And maybe that's because Justin Fields. But also, if you watch the second half of that game, everything is designed a rollout one way or the other, which, okay, a bootleg's great for Justin Fields. You can use his legs. You put pressure on a defense that has to decide, do we commit resources to the quarterback or do we stay in coverage? I'm fine with that. But it looked a lot like some of the Matt Canada stuff where every catch is on the sideline and a guy steps out of bounds and there's no yards after the catch. Justin Fields in week 1 went 17 for 23 for 156 yards. No touchdowns, no interceptions. He attempted, not completed, he attempted 0 passes between the numbers. None. Everything was to the perimeter. That is not an Arthur Smith offense. It's a Justin Fields offense, but I'll tell you why he didn't play to Fields' strengths later too. The Steelers generated 3.4 yards after the catch per reception. And 28 of the 57 total yards after the catch that the Steelers had on Sunday were from Najee Harris and Jalen Warren. So that's running backs on checkdowns and screens. There's a lot of checkdowns for those yards after the catch, especially you think Warren on a 3rd and 12, he gets 8 yards on a checkdown. Okay, that's not an explosive play. It's not a successful play. 15 of Fields' dropbacks featured play action. 14 didn't. This is a guy who's not a heavy play action quarterback. He's never excelled with play action. With play action on Sunday, Fields was 8 for 12 for 41 yards, 3.4 yards per attempt. Play action is how Arthur Smith has always generated explosive plays over the middle of the field. Everything off those play actions was to the sidelines. It was short. It generated 3.4 yards per attempt. That's not an Arthur Smith offense. Without play action, Fields went 9 for 11 for 115 yards, 10.5 yards per attempt. That's deep shots. That's a deep shot to George Pickens and another one that got called back on an offensive pass interference, not included in those numbers, which would have been very helpful because the officiating was pretty terrible. And Tommy Jagai of our Steel Curtain podcast, Steel Curtain site expert, tweeted out during last week that the Steelers had a refereeing crew. Steelers and Falcons had the refereeing crew of, I believe, Brad Rogers. I don't want to be wrong with the name. But regardless, the refereeing crew that 82% of the time last season, the home team won, which is just staggering. And the Steelers felt a lot of that, not just the TJ Watt strip sacks wiped away. There was that awful offensive pass interference called on George Pickens. That was not at all. So Fields was great without play action, yet he ran it over 50% of the time. And it generated no explosive plays. Fields has always been best out of the shotgun. And at halftime, Jimmy Johnson, a better coach than Arthur Smith, though he's not doing it anymore, ripped Arthur Smith for trying to fit players into his system instead of playing to his players' strengths. And that's what we saw. Fields played primarily under center, yet he continues to struggle with snaps, which is the fault of Justin Fields, but it's also the fault of Arthur Smith for not getting him in the shotgun where he's best. Especially if, when you're under center and doing the play action thing, you're not getting any of the explosives. That's the reason you do it, is to try to hit those throws over the middle of the field. They're not happening, so you're just making Justin Fields uncomfortable for no reason. Again, Arthur Smith's offense on Sunday played to neither his nor Justin Fields' strengths. And those short throws, Fields had a 6-yard average depth of target, a great deep ball thrower, averaged 6 yards downfield for his pass attempts on Sunday. It didn't even help his time to throw, which is a big problem for Justin Fields. He holds onto the ball too long. It didn't even help because it was still 3.28 seconds. And a lot of that's on bootlegs, and there were some scrambles and different things like that. Fields holding onto the ball. Again, a fault of Justin Fields. But the juice isn't worth the squeeze when you're not getting the explosive plays out of the play action, out of the under center stuff. Neither of those guys should be happy. Justin Fields or Arthur Smith should be happy with what the offense looked like on Sunday. And then for Arthur Smith, the winner of our Eaton Park Smiley Cookie Award for the thing only Yinzers will love, the main problem he had in Atlanta, one of the big reasons he got fired and the reason that he is hated by the fantasy football community, is his player usage, the way he deploys his personnel. He may have a great play designed, but who it's going to makes no sense. So, first, the running back split. Najee finished with 70 yards on 20 carries. Not a very efficient day on the ground. That's kind of Najee Harris's thing. That's the reason that Jalen Warren was so much better and more efficient last year. and it was about a 50-50 split last year, but that doesn't look like it'll be the case. Maybe the Steelers are still concerned about Warren's hamstring injury. That's wishful thinking on my part. But maybe Warren's just not going to be featured in this offense very much. 2 carries for 7 yards for Warren. And Cordero Patterson, while he played far fewer snaps, just 9 snaps, he had 4 carries for 13 yards, and 2 of those carries came on third downs, including that critical third down on the first drive of the game. That 3rd and 6. Carried it for 2 yards. Well done, Cordero. The most egregious one, however, was right before the failed 4th and 1 QB sneak. Right before Mike Tomlin stopped living in his fears. 3rd and 2 on the Atlanta 7. And heading into this, the Steelers, for the day on Sunday, because I don't know exactly if some of these came. I know a few of them came after. But the Steelers were 8 of 17 on 3rd down. And I'll bring this back up when I talk about Fields versus Wilson. 5 of those conversions, of those 8 conversions, were Justin Fields runs. 2 of them were throws to George Pickens. And another was a Najee Harris run. Justin Fields, with his legs, is one of your best players. Maybe not with his arm, but with his legs, he's one of your best players. George Pickens is your best player on offense. Najee Harris, in short yardage, is one of your best players on offense. I don't love Najee Harris. I think he's great at getting the tough yards. I think he's very useful as a short yardage back. 3rd and 2, I'd be happy with any of those 3 players getting the ball. I'd be happy with Pat Freiermuth getting the ball. I'd be happy with Jaylen Warren getting the ball. I would not be happy with a swing route to Van Jefferson with George Pickens and Calvin Austin trying to seal the edge as the lead blockers. The Steelers had the numbers to that side. And if either Austin or Pickens successfully blocked their man, Jefferson probably gets the 2 yards. But when you're relying on George Pickens, who's an interesting blocker, not a reliable one, sometimes he lands big hits, but is not a reliable blocker, and 5'9", whatever, 170 to 80 pounds Calvin Austin is, you're counting on the wrong people to do the task. It's a good play design. And maybe your thought process, Arthur Smith, is if I put Pat Freiermuth or Michael Pruitt out there or even a bigger receiver, that Atlanta will know what's coming. I'd rather them have an idea of what's coming than rely on Calvin Austin as one of the primary blockers for Van Jefferson on probably the most crucial play of the game. The 4th and 1 that came after it then became the most crucial play to that point of the game. But you're going to the wrong guys. And that's a huge reason Arthur Smith got fired in Atlanta. You have to put the ball in the hands of your best players when the game's on the line. Smith didn't get the passing game he wanted, didn't create the passing game Fields wanted, and didn't give his best players a chance to win the game. Sure, he's not Matt Canada, but it's hard to come away from week 1, at least for me, inspired about how this offense is going to look much different. 6 field goals and a win with defense is the same as it ever was with Matt Canada, with Randy Fichtner at the end of the Big Ben days, and it still won't work in the playoffs. And that's the whole point. And if that's not the point, if you don't view yourself as a team that's going to win a playoff game, then don't live in your fears with Justin Fields, Mike Tomlin, because now this comes back on you. Let a young quarterback try to make some plays. See what you actually have. See if you can develop him. A win, maybe it builds up his confidence, sure, but 6 yards per attempt, 6 yards average depth of target, rather, is not being aggressive enough with Justin Fields. His best ability is his legs and his deep ball. And you're not leaning into those because you're trying to win games the same way the Steelers have been trying to win games since they last won a playoff game in 2016. The Steelers are 1-0, but let's not act like everything's fixed. Chris Boswell had to hit field goals of 57, 51, 44, 56, 40, and 25 to even get to 18 points. Now, he didn't need all of those to win because, again, the defense was great. But the defense isn't going to be going against Kirk Cousins coming off of an Achilles tear every week. I think it'll be a good defense. With the way the Steelers played offense and the way Arthur Smith called that game and the way Justin Fields executed that offense, because there were certainly some things left on the table, and you got to factor in a couple of the penalties. That offense is not good enough to beat good teams. And that's why the Steelers are probably heading towards another 9-8 season. And by the end of the year, it's going to get real old. Right now, we're excited because football's back. At the end of last season, Steelers fans were not thrilled with what this team looked like. And I think that feeling is going to creep back in as we get further and further into the year with the same old thing. And I don't see it changing. Arthur Smith didn't fix it in week 1. And I don't know that he can. Maybe Russell Wilson will come in and it won't be the same old, same old. I don't think so. But that's the final thing we have to talk about. Because after the game, Mike Tomlin said he'd likely announce on Tuesday, who's going to be the starting quarterback for week 2 against the Denver Broncos, Russell Wilson's old team, the team that's paying him $83 million to play for the Pittsburgh Steelers over the next 2 years, because that's what they think of Russell Wilson. But maybe he'll take the job from Justin Fields. It's unclear if he's healthy enough with that calf injury that he aggravated and is the reason that Justin Fields took over as the starting quarterback in week 1. And if he's not 100%, I mean, I wouldn't put Wilson out there regardless. And I'll talk about that a little bit with Justin Fields because I want to spend even more time on it. But if Wilson isn't completely healthy, then you definitely can't put him out there. In week 1 also, just an aside, Russell Wilson being in full pads while he's inactive on the sidelines was the most ridiculous thing ever. And if you didn't believe me all offseason when I said he's the corniest player in the NFL, the most attention-seeking, corny player in the NFL, you saw it in week 1. We'll continue to see weird antics like that all year because he wants to prove he's some tough guy and he's like a man of the team. And just wear your street clothes. Anyone else would wear their street clothes. So weird. Man, it was so weird. Ridiculous behavior to be in full pads when you're ruled inactive. Let Justin Fields have it. Let it be his team for week 1. You can have a quarterback battle. You can think you're the starter. Just go put some street clothes on. It was ridiculous. Back to Fields. I mentioned the third down conversions. 5 of the 8 third down conversions were with Fields' legs. 2 passes to George Pickens, one of them a really nice throw early in the first quarter, and 1 Najee Harris run. That's incredibly valuable that 5 of their 8 third down conversions came from their quarterback, either on a designed run or a scramble. Not a lot of teams have that. The Steelers may not have a dynamic passing offense or a reliable passing offense with Justin Fields, but at least you have a get out of jail free card you can use 5-ish times a game. There were a lot of flaws in Fields' game that we saw with Kenny Pickett. He's too flighty in the pocket. He wants to get outside and create, and he wants to hold on to the ball too long. And it led to a couple of sacks. Sure, he took 2 sacks. One was on 3rd and 13. So, yeah, go try to create. Fine. Probably going to punt regardless. The other, try to get the ball out of your hands. But he was mostly additive. It was more positive than negative with his legs as a creator. Because when Kenny Pickett would try to do those things, would try to get out of the pocket, would try to keep a play alive. He's not athletic enough to do it. Justin Fields, at 6'4", 240, running a 4.4, can. He's probably the most athletic player on the NFL football field at almost any given time against any given team. That is the caliber of athlete that Justin Fields is, and we saw it be useful, be functional. The Steelers were adamant into the media, and the media, Greg Olsen predominantly said the game plan didn't change from Russell Wilson to Justin Fields when they found out Wilson couldn't go. It absolutely did. It definitely changed. First of all, it had to change. They're different players with different skill sets. Fields can still run, for example, and isn't 35 with a calf injury. And they sealed the game running quarterback power with Justin Fields. That is not in the Russell Wilson playbook. I can guarantee you that. These are different players. And the fact that Justin Fields can scare you, can hurt you on the ground, is incredibly valuable to the Pittsburgh Steelers offense. An offense that is not going to be the most efficient offense in the NFL with Russell Wilson or Justin Fields. At least you have that with Fields. And at the end of each half, you saw the value of Justin Fields. It was not a perfect debut. A lot of fans and probably the coaching staff will want to see Wilson. And fine, it's not going to be great. I can tell you that right now. But at the end of each half, you saw these flashes with Fields that are the reason that teams won't give up on him. The Bears gave up on him, but they gave up on him because Caleb Williams was there. And it's the reason why there's still some hope that he can be a possible bridge quarterback, right? He's not going to be an NFL superstar. But there's some value there. At the end of the first half, that bomb to Pickens, that's a great throw. It was open, sure. But the fact that Arthur Smith drew it up, trusted him to throw that deep ball, was great. And he executed it. You get 3 points out of it. The 2 deep balls to Pickens were both great throws as well. Leading Pickens to the inside on the one that did count was great because the cornerback had outside leverage. It was an excellent throw. The one down the sideline nailed that deep ball. That's Russell Wilson's best ability, and Fields can do that too. He also brings the running. And then at the end of the game, end of the second half, quarterback power on third down. Gets you a first down, essentially seals the game. Lets you run out the clock to about 30 seconds, kick the field goal, and win it. Right now in the NFL, there's a thing that's happening, right? Defense is ahead of offense. I mentioned that with Kirk Cousins not looking ready. There are a lot of offenses and passing games that do not look ready, did not look ready in week 1, and will continue to scuffle through the beginning of the season. This isn't just that defenses are revolting against the Patrick Mahomes deep balls and playing 2 deep safeties. And now there's the Mike McDonald revolution of simulated pressures and bluffing coverages and rolling safeties, all these different looks to confuse quarterbacks, especially early in the season when they haven't seen it live in a while. Defense is ahead of offense. Pending Monday Night Football, only 8 quarterbacks threw for 200 plus yards in week 1. I didn't love the Arthur Smith and Justin Fields combination, but it was on short preparation with a late change to a different quarterback, right? From Wilson to Fields. Passing is hard in the NFL right now, even though all of the rules are in place to help it boom. There's not a passing boom, at least early in this season. Defenses are ahead of offenses. And Justin Fields, at least until you have some more solutions, at least he brings a dynamic element on the ground. That's something Russell Wilson, pre-calf injury and certainly post-calf injury, will not bring you. I would absolutely stick with Justin Fields. Not just because I think he gives you the best chance to win on any given Sunday, but at least there's growth potential there. There's future potential there. There's a chance that he's a guy you can tie yourself to for 3 years while you search for the guy who's the ultimate answer at quarterback. I don't feel that way about Russell Wilson at his age, the way he's been on such a sharp decline. I do not think that Mike Tomlin will agree with me. If I had to guess, if I had to bet, I would bet that Russell Wilson is the Pittsburgh Steelers starting quarterback in week 2 at Denver. And it'll be interesting, right? We got the Arthur Smith homecoming and he got a win in Atlanta. Now the Russell Wilson homecoming to a place that was his temporary home in Denver before they kicked him and Sean Payton kicked him to the curb for Bo Nix, who looked really, really bad in week 1. So the Steelers defense can carry them to 2-0. And in my prediction of the season, I expected the Steelers to split the first 2 games. Probably lose the one in Atlanta. Now it's looking like they can get off to a 2-0 start, regardless of who's at quarterback, because of the defense. And okay, that's a good sign. I'll live with it, but I want to see improvement from this offense because it didn't look very good. It didn't look very different in week 1, at least in terms of the results, right? It's not Matt Canada, so it looked more functional. It looked more professional, but it netted you 18 points against a Falcons defense that was so concerned about how poor they were going to be on that side of the ball that they traded for Matthew Judon and signed Justin Simmons late in training camp. Now, they have those guys, so they're better. It's not a great sign. I expect Tomlin to go back to Wilson. Regardless of who's at quarterback, I expect the Steelers to get to 2-0. And in that case, they'll certainly still be in first place in the AFC North because things are not pretty for the rest of the AFC North. Potentially Baltimore withstanding, and they lost to the defending champs, the 2-time defending champs. So I think Baltimore's going to be fine. I think Joe Burrow always takes some time to warm up, but Cincinnati has some problems. And I think you can pretty much write Cleveland off, losing to Dallas the way that they did. I said not to overreact to the Steelers in week 1. I'll overreact to Cleveland because Deshaun Watson is not an NFL quarterback anymore. Completely fell apart. Was a disaster. That trade is a disaster. And it's hurt the rest of their roster because they haven't had first-round picks to supplement it with. So I feel a little bit better. As pessimistic as I was today, I feel a little bit better about the Steelers' prospects for finishing higher in the division after week 1, as much as you can from 1 week of football. But unless they figure out what this offense is going to look like with Arthur Smith and either Russell Wilson or Justin Fields and find a way to be dynamic and aggressive, and Mike Tomlin stops living in his fears, then I'm not going to believe in this team as a legitimate contender. Nothing I saw in week 1 changed my mind about that. Hopefully we see some of that in week 2. And it'll be interesting to see how things shake out. It'll be interesting to see how things shake out with the health of this team. Because something I didn't mention as we went through is Cameron Johnston, their great punter, the best punter the Steelers have had in a very, very, very long time. A significant injury. That's what the reporters are saying. The reports are now that his injury late in the game when there was a Atlanta player ran into his plant leg and nothing was called except the holding on Miles Killebrew, which is crazy. Johnston is probably gone, probably for most, if not all of the year. So maybe it's going to be Presley Harvin again. Hopefully the offensive line improves health-wise. We get Fautanu back and can move Broderick Jones over. But it's going to be hard to take Dan Moore off the field when he didn't allow any pressures in week 1. And Dan Moore Jr., to his credit, played a little bit better in week 1. Those are the things I'm keeping an eye out for in week 2. Hopefully it looks a little better on offense. and the Steelers get the same result. Pittsburgh is 1-0. That'll do it for my show. And I'll talk to you next week on Monday with a reaction to week 2, Steelers and Broncos. Hopefully it's more positive. This one, Steelers won, but I'm not feeling great about it. Hopefully it's more positive. Talk to you then. And until then, go Steelers. Have a good week.